Alright guys, and welcome back to the channel, and today I will be giving you my full card predictions and full card breakdown for UFC 327 live Saturday, April 11th, and I absolutely cannot wait to get into it, and we're going to go ahead and jump right into the very first prelim of the night, which is Charles Radtke versus Francisco Prado. And this is a pretty interesting fight here at welterweight, and you look over at the Charles Radtke side, and he's kind of been a little up and down, nothing super impressive. He's had a few solid wins, a few solid knockouts. The guy is honestly kind of a douchebag. I'm not a fan of him at all. I don't like his personality. I don't like the way he talks. He's got a very arrogant, just cocky attitude. So he's definitely a guy that I like to see get beat. But, you look over on the Francisco Prado side, and this kid is very young. He's only 23 years old, and he's been having it tough lately. He is on a 3-fight losing streak, and, he's had 4 losses out of his last 5 fights, which is not good for an up-and-coming young prospect, and this is most likely, if he loses this fight, it's most likely going to lead to him getting cut. He'll go to the regionals, he'll improve, he'll get better, and maybe he will be back down the road, which is the case for a lot of young fighters that get cut. They improve, out in other promotions, and then they wind up getting invited back. So, this is a pretty interesting matchup on paper, and Charles Radtke's 35, kind of getting up there in age. He's got good, solid power. Pretty nasty striking when he's able to put it together. But Francisco Prado, on the other hand, just fell short so many times against Daniel Sahuber, Jake Matthews, and then Nikolai Veretennikov, which is not a good look at all. Nikolai Veretennikov is very low level, not great. Had a pretty good win in his last performance, but he's very, very low level. Nothing super impressive. So, for him to not even be able to get past kind of an aging veteran fighter like that, it's not a good sign. And even though I'm not a big fan of Charles Radtke, he does have solid striking. He's got power in his hands, and I think he's going to be able to outstrike Francisco Prado for the majority of this fight. I don't think he's going to finish Francisco, but I think he will beat him to the punch. He will be the sharper striker, and I think it's going to be another tough night for Francisco, and then we're going to see him get cut. So I am going to go ahead and side with Charles Radtke by decision in this one. All right, moving on up, we are looking at Marquel Mederos versus Chris Taco Padilla, and a very fun fight here at lightweight, and you look over the Chris Padilla side, man, he just kind of came into the UFC, like we didn't know a lot about him. He's got the crazy, funky hair, and you're kind of looking at him like, okay, maybe he'll be okay, and he's been pretty impressive, man, and he is on a massive win streak. And he had a massive win in his last fight against Ismael Bonfim. And if you know who the Bonfim brothers are, they are 2 of the most intimidating and best brothers in the UFC right now. These guys are kind of running through people outside of Ismael, who is now kind of having a little bit of a hard time. And this is a perfect example of that because Ismael and his brother have great striking. They have good jiu-jitsu. They're very powerful. But in Ismael's last fight, Chris Padilla was able to just kind of come forward, weather the storm, break him, and he was able to TKO him, which is a massive feather in the cap right now. And then before that, he had the very impressive win over the dangerous English kickboxer Jai Herbert, and that was a split decision, but he did enough in that fight, so Chris Padilla has been looking pretty good. And then you look over at the Marquel Mederos side, and he's looked pretty solid too, having a nice, solid, unanimous decision win over Mark Chiansky in his last fight, but that was a long time ago. And then before that, picking up its split decision win over Austin Hubbard, and Austin Hubbard's not that good, kind of low level, barely mid-card. So, even though Marquel has been looking pretty decent, I have liked what I've seen from Chris Padilla so far. Like, he's really putting it together. He's really starting to settle in. And he looks like he might start to become kind of like this, kind of high-floating problem in the division. He's kind of getting up there, and that performance against Ismael Bonfim is, that's no joke. That's a solid win in his cap. So even though Marquel Mederos has had good striking, he's looked pretty good, Chris Padilla's just looked a little more impressive to me. He's just been able to download guys, slowly break them, slowly outstrike them, and he's just been able to kind of be a tactician on the feet and really figure it out. And so I think in this fight, I think it's going to be a good back-and-forth scrap. I think it's going to be, pretty interesting on the feet early, but I do expect Chris Padilla to eventually kind of settle in, press forward, get around the striking of Marquel, and I think he's going to wind up beating him to a decision. Maybe he finishes Marquel. He only has one loss on his record. I don't know if it's a finish, but there's just a higher chance that Chris Padilla is probably just going to outstrike him, outwork him, outpace him for 3 rounds. So I am going to go ahead and pick Chris Taco Padilla by decision in this one. All right, and we are moving on up to the very next fight, which is a very interesting fight at middleweight in Kelvin Gastelum versus Vicente Luque. And, you know, this is such an interesting fight for so many reasons because I'm a huge Vicente Luque fan. And just a few short years ago, Vicente Luque was one of the biggest dark horse problems in the middleweight division, and I believe he was even back at welterweight as well for a long time. And Vicente Luque was just, I mean, it's in his nickname, the Silent Assassin. This kid's striking, his boxing, his jiu-jitsu was absolutely nightmarish top level. I mean, one of the best Darce chokes in the game, one of the best Anaconda chokes. He was so well-rounded. And he was just cruising, beating everybody, you know, Tyrone Woodley, so many good guys. And then he fought Jeff Neal, and he had a brain bleed. And that was a really scary moment for him, you know, and he took some time off, recovered from the brain bleed, but then he came back and he never looked quite the same. And now he's had it really tough. You know, he got knocked out by Joaquin Buckley. He did not look good in that fight at all. Looked very underwhelming. He looked flat, didn't look confident in himself. Then he did get the pretty, you know, great win over Themba Gorimbo, but Themba Gorimbo is, you know, he's still low level, not even at the mid-card yet. You know, Themba's okay. Pretty solid skills, but, you know, he was able to catch him, choke him out cold in that fight, which was impressive. Then he got choked out by Kevin Holland, who has very underrated jiu-jitsu. Kevin was able to kind of steamroll him. And then he had the really tough beating loss to the phenomenally talented Joel Alvarez. So Vicente Luque has just not looked the same ever since he had that brain bleed. And, you know, he's middle-aged now. He's 35. He's kind of getting up there. And it's really hard to say if he's going to be able to make a career comeback. And there's just a part of me that thinks it's not going to happen. He's not going to be able to return to the Vicente Luque of old. And then you look over the Kelvin Gastelum side, and Kelvin Gastelum has always been a very solid test in the middleweight division. You know, he's got a deadly southpaw left hand, you know, very good movement, throws that left hand very well, very tough, can take a beating, you know, and Kelvin's never been knocked out. You know, we saw the war that he had with Izzy, the damage that he took from Joe Pyfer, getting dropped in both fights. Kelvin's very durable, but he sets a pace, and he's very good in that southpaw stance, you know, and even though Kelvin's never going to be a champion, he's never going to be a top 5 fighter, he's tough, and he's hard to deal with. And if this fight was happening even 3 to 4 years ago, I would be picking Vicente Luque all day. I would be picking Vicente Luque to be the sharper, cleaner, better boxer, to be able to, you know, take Kelvin down, get his submission game going, and I think it would be, you know, a very solid performance and win for Vicente Luque. But Vicente Luque at this current stage, I just think that he's most likely falling off. I would love it if he came out in this fight, landed a bomb on Kelvin, dropped him, grabbed his neck, and got a massive win, because this is the kind of win that he needs to get back on track. But Kelvin is historically tough, one of the best chins in the UFC, a great southpaw stance, very powerful with his left hand. And I think Kelvin is just going to be able to get around him. And I think Vicente's going to come out and look dejected, look unsure of himself, and just kind of freeze. And because of that, I think Vicente Luque, I'm sorry, but I think Kelvin Gastelum is going to be able to outstrike Vicente. And I think he's going to wind up picking up the decision here. I don't think he's going to knock Vicente out. Now, if he lands like a Michael Bisping counter punch in the pocket, absolutely. But I think he's just going to beat up Kelvin Gastelum for 3 rounds. And, you know, he's going to beat up Vicente Luque for 3 rounds. And Kelvin hasn't had a finish in a while. It's been a while since he's been able to knock someone out. So he's just kind of cruising with good boxing and a good left hand. So I am going to go ahead and say Kelvin Gastelum picks up this win, probably 30-27, and maybe possibly finishes Vicente Luque in this fight. All right, and we are moving on up very speedily to a very interesting fight at lightweight in Mateusz Gamrot versus Esteban Ribovics. And this is a very fun fight here at lightweight. You know, and you look over the Mateusz Gamrot side, and Mateusz is one of the hardest puzzles and problems to solve in the lightweight division right now. His grappling, his wrestling, his pressure, his pace is so incredibly hard to deal with. And he's been able to run through so many guys with it outside of Charles Oliveira and outside of Dan Hooker, which was a very close competitive fight. And really the only really solid straight-up finishing loss has been against Charles, who is just no question the best grappler in the division. We already knew that, but especially after what he just did to Max Holloway. Charles is an elite grappler, jiu-jitsu practitioner, and he's the best right now. And Mateusz Gamrot ran into a wall with that one. He just ran into somebody who is better in all of those areas. And Mateusz sets a pace, man, and that grappling is really tough to deal with. And then you look over the Esteban Ribovics side, man, and Esteban's very good, very solid striker on the feet, very sharp hands, very tough. He had an absolute crazy fight, with Nasrat Haqparast a long time ago. Before that, Daniel Zellhuber in the Sphere. That was a phenomenal fight back and forth. He hurt Daniel. Daniel hurt him a little bit. So Esteban is no joke. And then that devastating, absolutely insane kick that he hit Terrence McKinney with and knocked him into the cage, into the next dimension, was absolutely incredible. Super, super sharp KO win for Esteban Ribovics in that fight. And it was absolutely awesome. So, Esteban is very solid on the feet, very sharp striking, he moves very well. He's a very good tactical fighter. But in this fight, I think, even though he's going to have moments on the feet and he's going to be able to move a little bit and get his shots out there and maybe touch Mateusz Gamrot up a little bit, at some point Mateusz is going to get past your shots and he's going to be able to get a hold of you and he's going to be able to drag you down. And that is going to be tough to overcome, because once he starts chaining takedowns together and he starts holding you down, that's a different level of grappling, a different level of pressure. And Esteban Ribovics has not dealt with that before. Esteban has, has historically fought strikers and just been in stand-up wars. But Mateusz Gamrot is not just going to stand there and strike with you. He's gonna get past it. He's going to get your hips. He's going to get your legs and get you down. So I think in this fight, it's going to be back and forth, but I cannot see Esteban shutting down the takedowns long enough. I don't think he's going to be able to get back up to his feet long enough, and I don't think he's going to be able to keep Mateusz Gamrot off of him for the course of 15 minutes. So I think Mateusz is going to do what he does best, get past that striking, weather a tiny bit of a storm, and then he's just going to be able to get a hold of Esteban and take him down and just be able to control him mostly. And if he can't hold him on the ground, he'll just chain takedowns and keep getting them, and then it's quantity over quality, which still wins you around if you get enough of them. So I'm going to go Mateusz Gamrot by decision in this one. All right, and now we are moving on up to a very interesting fight in the battle of the Bellator fighters in Patricio Pitbull versus Aaron Pico. And this is a super interesting fight, and you look over the Patricio Pitbull side, and he is aging. He is up there. He's 38, but he's still very dangerous. Pitbull's got great power in his hands. Very tough, a very hard style to deal with. But, you look at the last win that he had against Dan Ige, had a very good performance in that against a very solid, tough test and veteran in Dan Ige. And then before that, he did lose to the very dynamic, elusive, hard-to-find Yair Rodriguez. But then the worrying part of this fight, and the main thing that I'm going to focus on here, is that he was knocked out in Rizin about 2 years ago at the age of 36, right as he's starting to get up there in age. And he was knocked out flat, got an exchange with the guy. The guy caught him with a left-right up against the ropes and flatlined Patricio. So he has been viciously knocked out in the last 2 years. And once you crack that chin, as you start to age, normally that crack gets bigger and bigger and gets wider and wider. And when you look over at Aaron Pico is very dangerous on the feet, an elite striker on the feet, very, very fast, very, very powerful, and he has knocked a ton of guys absolutely dead. But on the other hand, Aaron Pico has been knocked out many times himself. He's been caught and flatlined, which is, very risky. So his chin has been suspect, and he's been knocked out. Even though he's much younger, he's been knocked out much more than Patricio has. So, it's been a little bit of a challenge with him, like when he fought Lerone Murphy in that last fight. He was coming in, trying to corner, trying to cut off Lerone, and he went to kind of step. Lerone stepped to the other side, turned and hit him with that spinning elbow and knocked him out cold. So now he's coming off of another flat, dead knockout loss. So it's been tough for him. But Aaron Pico is still young. He's not up there at the age yet where that crack is going to start to get bigger and bigger just yet. He's just been caught by very powerful fighters. And Pitbull is powerful. He's got one-punch power in his hand. So Aaron Pico has to be very careful in this fight in the pocket because Patricio could just duck under, roll under a combination, and come up with a counter, Rampage Jackson style, and knock him out cold. But Aaron Pico in this fight is going to have the speed advantage, no question. And in the pocket, he's going to be faster, he's going to be quicker. And even though Pitbull's tough, he has been knocked out at 36 years old, even a little less time. So I think in this fight, Aaron Pico, as long as he keeps his hands up, he moves his head, he doesn't get in the pocket too long with Patricio, I think he's going to be faster. I think he's going to beat Patricio to the punch. And I think he is going to knock Patricio out in the second round. I think the first round is going to be competitive. It'll be back and forth. They'll be finding the timing. They'll both be slinging shots. But I expect Aaron Pico to be able to be just the faster striker in the pocket with the better combinations, and that speed is going to come through over the top and just connect on Pitbull's chin, and I think Pitbull's going to get put out. If not, if Aaron Pico can survive Pitbull's power for 3 rounds, he's still going to be the faster, technical, zippier striker, and he picks up a decision. But I think he's going to find Patricio's chin, and I think he's going to put him away. And then he'll kind of get back on track to possibly being a problem in the featherweight division. So I am going to go Aaron Pico by second round KO in this one. All right, and we are moving on up to a very, very interesting and tough fight. A mere match on paper. Such an incredibly close matchup here in Kevin the Trailblazer Holland versus Randy Rude Boy Brown. And boy, I can't believe these guys have not fought previously. It feels like they should have met a long time ago instead of just now, because they are so evenly matched on paper. I mean, you look at these guys' fighting styles, their striking styles, they're both long, both 6'3". Kevin Holland's got an 81-inch reach. Randy Brown's got a 78. Very long legs, long arms, and these guys are tall and they're rangy. And they have very similar ways that they strike, and Kevin Holland will kind of just sit back, kind of throw a shot here and there, blitz in, and Randy's very slick on the feet, very tactical, picks his shots very well. And the one edge that Kevin Holland is going to have over Randy Brown is his submissions, his jiu-jitsu. Kevin Holland has some of the most underrated jiu-jitsu in the UFC. He's primarily a striker, but he has shown us time and time again, if he can get you to the floor, he can tap you. He tapped Vicente Luque. He tapped Michael Olin J. Chuck. His submission game is so top-notch. And that is where I worry in this fight, is that on the feet, it's going to be very even, very back and forth. It's going to be a chess match, a coin flip almost. But if Kevin can get Randy down, that's going to be his world. But my problem with Kevin Holland, as we all know, and I call him coin flip Kevin Holland, is you never know which version of Kevin Holland you're going to get. Because when Kevin Holland does not give a shit, he comes in and he gets steamrolled. He gets beat and he doesn't care. And he's even come out on podcast and said, I don't care about the belt. I don't care about being a champion. I just want to fight and make money. Well, you kind of need to care. You need to kind of be consistent, or you're going to wind up getting cut one day, and it's, why not try to make it to the belt and be the best in the world? It's kind of a silly mindset. So, Kevin just doesn't care sometimes. And when he shows up and doesn't care, he looks awful and he gets steamrolled. But when he shows up and he gives a shit, Kevin's good. But Randy Brown is very good. He's very sharp on the feet, very tactical, very long, very rangy. Picks his shots, and Randy Brown is more consistent than Kevin Holland. And even though he's had some losses against Brian Battle, that was a very questionable decision because there was a case to give it to Randy Brown in that fight. And I actually thought that he did win that fight by a hair. And then he had the loss to Gabriel Bonfim where he just got blasted and caught with the knee. Outside of that, Randy Brown has been an absolute assassin on the feet. I mean, deadly precision power, cannon shots down the middle. So he is a little bit more of a consistent striker than Kevin Holland is. And I have a feeling if Kevin Holland comes into this fight and he doesn't care and he's just kind of there and he's not really trying to make an effort, then Randy Brown, in these exchanges is just going to be the faster, zippier, cleaner striker. And he is. Kevin Holland's good when he wants to, put it on you and put combinations together. He is accurate, but Randy Brown is a little more accurate and a little more tactical and a little more sharp in his technique. And in that case, I am actually going to side with Randy Brown in this fight. I think he will probably pick up a very close split decision against Kevin Holland. He'll just be more accurate. He'll be more defensively aware, because Kevin's not super defensively sound. He keeps his hands down low. He gets hit with shots, but he eats them very well. And Randy Brown's a little more slick. He moves with the waves. He moves with the flow. And he hits you with combinations, so he's a little more actively aware of those things. And I think Randy Brown is going to be just slick enough, want it just a little more, and I think he's going to be able to outpoint Kevin on the feet because Kevin's probably going to show up and just kind of, let me just get through it. And that's not really going to be good enough to beat someone like Randy Brown. But if it goes to the ground, then Kevin probably wins the fight. But I don't know if he's going to be able to get Randy down. So I'm going to say, on the feet, it's going to be back and forth. It's going to be competitive, but Randy is going to simply use his defensive, technical abilities and his striking a little better. And I'm going to go Randy Brown by decision in this one in a very close, competitive, mirror matching fight. All right, and now we are moving on up to Cub Swanson versus Nate Landwehr, and this is a very, very interesting fight here at featherweight, and we look over the Cub Swanson side, man, and Cub Swanson is an absolute veteran of the game, one of the most beloved fighters in UFC history. He's been around so long, and Cub is just a dog, man, just fantastic striking, his style, his presence, his personality, man. Cub is just awesome, and Cub has had a lot of great wins in his career, but then, recently, he's been win-lose, and he's 42 years old. He is up there in age. He's starting to slow down a bit. And you look at his losses to Jonathan Martinez, not knocking him there. Jonathan Martinez is very hard to deal with, a very good leg kicker, very, very sharp, very defensively sound, and then his loss to Andre Fili. But then you look over at his win against Hakeem Dawodu, and that was a atrocious call. Hakeem Dawodu won that fight, no question. And I don't know what the judges were looking at, but they gave it to Cub. And if I remember, even Cub on the microphone afterwards was like, yeah, man, I don't think I won that fight, but it is what it is, So he should be coming off of another loss on top of the other two. So don't let this win fool you, because that was a fight that he got outstruck in and should have lost. And then now we give him some credit. The Billy Quarantillo fight was awesome. But Billy Quarantillo is very low level, very barely even mid-level. And he was able to catch Billy and knock him out. So Cub still has power. He's still dangerous on the feet. But he does struggle in fights that get extended, where guys are just faster and zippier and more athletic than him. And now you look over at the Nate Landwehr side, and I absolutely cannot stand this guy. I think he is the biggest douchebag in the UFC. Everything about him makes my bones and my soul cringe. He is an absolute just asshole. The way that he talks pisses me off. Just the redneck, awful, goofy shit that he says, Nate the Train baby, what's up, suck my ass. Like, he's so obnoxious. Every time I see this guy fight, I want to see him get put just completely out cold, and it warms my soul. I don't like anything about him, but I will give Nate the credit. He is very tough, and he is a dog. And even though he was knocked out by Morgan Charrier in his last fight, which I absolutely did a backflip over. And then he was knocked out by Doo Ho Choi. He is being outstruck by faster, zippier, more powerful strikers and getting knocked out. But he's also, historically, with guys that are a little lower level, that are a little slower, he can take a beating, and he can come back, and he can weather a storm. And this is what's so tough, because if Cub was in his prime, if Cub was like 5 years younger, I would be picking Cub all day to just steamroll Nate and just knock him out. And Cub is still dangerous and still has that power. But I feel like Cub has slowed down. He's a tad behind. And even though his power is still there, I don't know if it's going to be enough to blow through someone like Nate Landwehr, because, Nate is getting blasted by guys that are young, athletic, fast, absolute cannons. But Cub is at a little bit more of a mild pace, so I think Cub is going to be able to put it on him early. He's probably going to hurt Nate early. but I have a feeling Nate's going to survive the storm. He's going to come back. He's going to put it on Cub, and even though I hate it and don't want to imagine it, he's most likely going to outdog Cub in the second and third round. And I can't stand the dude. I hope he gets steamrolled and cut from the UFC, but he is a dog. I do think he's going to be able to weather the aging Cub Swanson storm, and he's probably going to be able to pick up this fight 29-28 on the card. So, unfortunately, I am going to side with Nate Landwehr in this fight, and it pains me, but that's just how I see. I think that first round is going to be Cub, but then once Nate survives it, if he can, he's going to wind up coming back, and he did that in his fight against Jamal Emmers. Jamal Emmers was cracking him with punches, hitting him with good shots, and then he came back and broke Emmers. So, unfortunately, I will be picking Nate Landwehr by decision in this one. All right, and we are moving on up to a very interesting fight at women's strawweight in Tatiana Suarez versus Lupita Godinez, and this is a very fun fight, and you look over the Tatiana side, and Tatiana's had it very tough in her career. She was dealing with thyroid cancer, multiple injuries, sat on the shelf for a very long time, but Tatiana Suarez is a top-level, almost near Olympic grappler. Her grappling is fantastic, and if I remember, she almost qualified, I think, for the Olympics, or one of those national big trials, and she was just cut short because of her neck injury. Then she had a neck injury, then a knee injury. So she's had a lot of, unfortunate problems in her career. But Tatiana Suarez, now she's back. She is a little older, but, her grappling is still high level. Her takedowns, her pressure is still so hard to deal with. And she showed that in the Amanda Lemos fight. She was able to get her down multiple times. And she did get beat up by Weili Zhang and didn't look good in that fight. But that was her return fight after almost 2 years off. So I'm going to give her a little bit of leeway in that fight, because a lot of time off, dealing with a lot of injuries and ring rust. And then you look over at the Lupita Godinez side, and Lupita's looked very solid, very sharp on the feet, moves very well, downloads you, is able to outstrike you, very well-rounded, mixes up her combinations, her kicks, sometimes her clinching and her grappling, so Lupita's looked good, and she's coming off the win against Jessica Andrade, a former champion, before that Julia Pilastri, so Lupita's been like a solid little ball of energy in the division, and she's been a little bit of a problem. But she has run into hiccups in fights. Mackenzie Dern, one of the most elite grapplers and now a champion of the division. Before that, another high-level grappler, Verna Jandiroba. So Lupita has struggled with grapplers in her past, and Tatiana, that's her bread and butter. So I think in this fight, they're going to come out, they're going to be kind of feeling each other out, and Lupita might be a little zippy on the feet at first, but eventually Tatiana is going to be able to close in on Lupita, shut down that boxing range, kind of get around her shots, and I think Tatiana's going to start to get her up against the cage, drag her down, and control her on the ground. And Lupita might be able to kind of evade it for a while, maybe, for a round or so, but eventually Tatiana is going to get a hold of her, and she is going to be the bigger girl in this fight with a much bigger reach. She's going to have about a 3 to 4 inch height advantage on her and a 5-inch reach advantage on her, which is going to be pretty huge. So she'll be able to probably land shots on Lupita, get around the shorter range striking, and then she'll be able to get in and implement her grappling, and I think she'll beat Lupita probably a 30-27, at the least a 29-28 in this one. And Lupita will hang in there, but I don't think she's going to be able to overcome the grappling because Lupita has been taken down in most of her recent fights, at least 2 or 3 times in a fight. I think maybe in her last fight against Jessica Andrade, she didn't get taken down, but all the fights before that, she got taken down at least 1 to 2 times, sometimes 3 times in a round. So, I think Tatiana's just going to be a problem in this fight, and I think she's going to get past her with that elite grappling. So, Tatiana Suarez by decision is going to be the pick in this one. All right, and we are moving on up to Curtis Razor Blaydes versus Josh Hokit, and a pretty interesting fight here at heavyweight. And looking over at the Josh Hokit side, this guy just debuted not too long ago. I think this is his second fight. Yeah, second fight in the UFC. And yeah, he's run through the guys that he's fought, and he's had some pretty good knockouts, but this guy is pretty damn cringe, pretty silly on the mic, kind of talking Conor McGregor, trying to talk Conor McGregor levels of shit. and it just doesn't work, and he's very cringy and very silly, in my opinion. And I'm like, okay, you're kind of just this dumpy heavyweight who's beating low-level cans, and now you're cutting these promos on the mic, and it's just not working. And you look, he's got a Conor McGregor-level lion tattoo, like Conor has the monkey and the tiger, whatever it is. And, you know, he's kind of even got the Conor tattoo. So it's like, this guy he's not impressed me. The wins over these low-level cans have not impressed me. Denzel Freeman is extremely low level, not good at all, and probably might even be cut at this point. But then you look over the Curtis Blaydes side, and Curtis is a veteran, an excellent wrestler, an excellent striker. You know, like Curtis, when he puts it together, man, he's a problem. You know, and we saw what he did back in the day to Alistair Overeem, shooting a double leg, landing these nasty elbows on him, busting Overeem up, slicing his forehead, TKOing him. And outside of his losses to Sergey Pavlovich and Tom Aspinall, who are two of the biggest, most devastating, fastest strikers in the division, which you can't knock him for, he still looked very good. You know, he picked up the win against Rizvan Kuniev, and then the win against Jailton Almeida, you know, just steamrolling and pretty much putting that hype train to bed with the elbows up against the cage. So Curtis Blaydes, you know, even though he's had some hiccups, he's a very well-rounded, solid veteran. Great takedowns, great wrestling, sharp on the feet, and he's got a lot of power. And I think in this fight, I think it's too much too soon for Josh Hokit, and I think he's going to run into a brick wall. He's not going to knock Curtis Blaydes out. Curtis is going to be able to get under his slower striking, take him down, and I think Curtis is just going to control him on the ground and be able to beat him up, you know, sit in guard, throw elbows, maybe even get to half guard, maybe get to mount, maybe possibly finishes Josh Hokit. But I think Curtis just has so much experience, so much wrestling experience. He's got the better hands, the better control. He's the stronger fighter. And Josh Hokit, you know, he's just unproven. These two dudes that he beat are nobodies. And, you know, the promos are cringe. The attitude is cringe. Not a fan. And I think Curtis is just going to be able to pretty much outdog him, out-experience him, out-edge him for 3 straight rounds. Now, he might finish Josh Hokit, might get in his guard and just Overeem elbow him and knock him out. But I think he's just going to kind of dominate Josh Hokit for 3 rounds, and it probably won't even be close. So I'm going to go ahead and pick Curtis Blaydes by decision, and I think it's probably going to be a 30-27, just clean sweep. So Curtis Blaydes by decision is the official pick. All right, and now we are moving on up to Azamat Murzakanov versus Paulo Costa, and a pretty fun fight here at lightweight, you know, light heavyweight. You know, and you look over at the Paulo Costa side, you know, and Paulo Costa, you know, he's a veteran of the game, been around a long time, you know, and Paulo Costa's just always kind of been, you know, almost kind of in the top 5, floating in the mid-card, been a very solid, almost kind of gatekeeper. But, you know, Paulo Costa's had a lot of ups and downs. You know, he's a solid fighter on the feet. He's got good striking, very powerful, very juicy, suspiciously juicy. We've always looked at Paulo Costa like, dude, where is that physique coming from? Just like Yoel Romero, like, you're passing drug tests, but we don't know how you're passing drug tests because you look unusually jacked, unusually vascular, like, something is just not right with Paulo, but somehow he tests clean. You know, and he has good performances here and there against Luke Rockhold, against Roman Kopylov. He looked really good in that fight, and Roman Kopylov is a problem, you know, but Roman Kopylov, you know, he moves well, sharp counter striker, very hard to deal with, but Roman was just able to shut him down in that fight. But he is coming off losses to Sean Strickland, Robert Whittaker, much better strikers, and even Marvin Vettori, which isn't good. Like, if you're losing to Marvin Vettori these days, like, you've got a problem. But then you look over at the Azamat Murzakanov side, man, and even at 36, and even though he's still new to the UFC, he's looked good, you know, running through Alexander Rakic, running through Brennison Ribeiro. Very good, powerful tank-style striking on the feet. You know, so he's aging, and he is the shorter fighter in this fight. But he has shown consistent striking. He's shown consistent power, very sharp boxing, you know, very, very quick and light on the feet, kind of for his size and his shape. And in this fight, you know, even though Paulo's very good at just being able to, like, bring you into a dogfight and just sit in the pocket and just kind of outwork you, I think Paulo is going to have a hard time in this fight dealing with the power and the precision of Azamat. And Azamat, I think he's going to be able to just kind of get in on Paulo, get around his striking in the pocket, and just bust him up with really solid shots. And Paulo has historically been tough, one of the best chins in MMA. The only person that I can remember that was able to finish him was Izzy. And Izzy TKO'd him. Izzy didn't knock him out cold, but he did catch him and was able to finish him. And maybe Azamat is able to do the same thing. He might be able to catch Paulo with a shot, drop him, TKO him. But I think Murzakanov is going to be able to just sit in the pocket with Paulo, kind of step back to the outside, kind of in and out. And I think he's going to be able to just outwork him and crack him with shots. And I think he's going to wind up beating Paulo to a decision. He may finish him, but Paulo has had a great chin. Izzy was the only one to really stop him on that. And I think Murzakanov is just going to outstrike him for 3 rounds. And Paulo's going to be just behind in the pocket. He's not going to be able to do enough damage to Azamat, and Azamat is going to be the one landing these significant, big-time strikes that make a difference. The judges are going to go, wow, that's a big power difference. And he might be able to catch him and put him out, but I think he's just going to beat Paulo Costa to the punch for 3 rounds, and he will lose a decision. So Azamat Murzakanov by decision is going to be the pick in this one. All right, and we are moving on up to the very next fight on the card, which is Dominic Reyes versus Johnny Walker. And this is a super, super interesting fight, because on paper, this is a very, very, style-wise, it gets very close, very interesting, with Johnny Walker being the more dynamic, unpredictable, and wild striker. But when it comes down to pure power, who can land the shot and knock the other one out, because they've both been knocked out multiple times, it's almost a coin flip. And Dominic Reyes, in his run 5 years ago, when he made it to John Jones, was looking absolutely awesome. Outside of the loss to Jiří Procházka, Dominic Reyes was just getting through everybody. Then he gets to the John Jones fight, completely outstrikes John Jones for 3 rounds, had John, just backing up, landing the shots in the pocket, and should have won that fight. One of the most atrocious robberies in UFC history. And then he just kind of gassed kind of in the early 4th round, but he was still pressing John, still hunting, still pressing the action. And John wasn't doing a whole lot of anything. You can give John the last 2 rounds barely, but at the end of the day, Dominic Reyes outstruck John for 3 rounds and was the more active, pressing, busier fighter. Even if he wasn't landing his shots in the last 2 rounds, he was still backing John up. So Dominic Reyes 100% won that fight. And then he loses, gets robbed, and then he gets on an absolutely just awful knockout loss streak. Everybody starts knocking him out, and it looks like we have officially seen the end of Dominic Reyes. And it was such a just dejecting, just unfortunate thing to see, because it's like he should have been a champion and now he's being knocked out left and right. But then after his knockout loss to Ryan Spann, Dominic Reyes made a resurgence. He came back, knocked out Dustin Jacoby, knocked out Anthony Smith, and then knocked out Nikita Krylov with the Conor Aldo punch, man. And it was like, man, Dominic Reyes is finally back on track. Maybe he's going to get a second resurgence and make it back to the belt and win the belt and correct the wrong that was done to him 5 years prior. But then right when it was looking so good for him, he ran into the massively freight train assassin problem of Carlos Ulberg, and he got knocked out again. So now Dominic Reyes is 36 years old with 5 to 6 knockout losses. He has taken a tremendous amount of damage, a lot of brain damage, a lot of chin cracking, that's just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's getting scary for Dominic again. You're like, oh no, was that just a hiccup and he's going to get back on track, or is he just going to start to get knocked out a lot again? And then you look over the Johnny Walker side, and Johnny Walker has been one of the most explosive, dynamic, scary problems in the division. He's so wild, so loose on the feet, flying knees, spinning back kicks, spinning back fists. You never know what Johnny Walker is going to throw at you. And Dominic Reyes is the more technical striker. He is by far the more technical, precise, calculated, better boxer with the better technique and the better setups. And even though Johnny Walker is not super technical, he's explosive and he's unpredictable. He's like Jiří Procházka, where you just can't figure out what he's going to do. And that's what scares me in this fight, is because I think Dominic Reyes is going to be the better technical striker early. And if he can land the proper 1-2 on Johnny, he can put him out because Johnny's been knocked out. Magomed knocked him out viciously. Volkan Oezdemir put him asleep against the cage. So Johnny Walker's chin is very suspect too. It's very, very compromised too. So any big power shot from Dominic Reyes could put him out. So it's a true coin flip. Both have tremendous power. Both have compromised chins. Both have been knocked out multiple times. Dominic's the more technical striker. But what I fear in this fight is that Dominic is going to come forward. He's going to be in the pocket with Johnny Walker, backing him up. He's going to start to try to unload a combination on him. And right when it looks like Dominic Reyes is going to land the proper combination punch to put Johnny Walker out, I think Johnny Walker is going to hit him with either a flying knee or a big uppercut combination hook or a spinning back fist attack. And I think Dominic Reyes is going to get caught in the storm. I think he's going to get clipped, and then he's going to get knocked out, and it's going to be another heartbreaking loss for Dominic Reyes. I want to be wrong. I want Dominic to win this fight. I want him to get back on track and correct this loss to Carlos Ulberg. But I just have a bad feeling oh no, this might be the second wave of him getting knocked out in multiple fights again. And Johnny Walker was losing the fight to Ming Yang Zhang, but then he wound up coming back and he wound up getting that finish. So, he's kind of looking dangerous again. So I'm looking at it going, I think Dominic's going to be more technical and be pressing and be landing some shots, but then Johnny Walker's going to hit him with something he's not going to see and he's going to crumple. And that's what scares me. So it's a coin flip. I'm not confident in it. Dominic Reyes could very easily knock him out with a nasty combination. But I have a bad feeling Walker's going to survive it backing up, and then he's just going to throw something explosive out of nowhere, and Dominic Reyes is going to get caught and hit the floor. So I am going Johnny Walker by coin flip first round KO in this one. All right, we are moving on up to the co-main event, and I absolutely cannot wait to talk about this. We are looking at Joshua, the Fearless Van, versus Tatsuro, the Best Taira, which is a terrible nickname. I didn't even know he had that nickname until just now. What in the best? Okay, you couldn't have thought of anything better, so that's a pretty bad nickname. But regardless, Joshua Van, man, this kid has looked so absolutely incredible since he has stepped into the UFC. I have been a fan of him since his very first fight because I looked at his first fight, which was about 2 to 3 years ago now, and I was like, God, this kid is so young, and he would have been 21 at the time, and his striking looked so damn good even back then. He had the fundamentals. He had the boxing. He had the technique. He had the rolling. Everything looked so good. And I'm like, man, this kid is brand new to the company and he's striking like a 10-year veteran. Imagine how good this kid is going to be in a year or two. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. Joshua Van just kept getting better and better. And that boxing looked so crisp and that technique and that movement and that shell. And he just, the absolute epitome of beautiful technical MMA striking and boxing. And he just was picking it up, man. And he looked so good. And then he had the loss to Charles Johnson, and Charles Johnson was able to catch him. And everybody can get caught. Anybody can have a bad day. But then he got right back on track, running through Cody Durden, Ray Soraya, running through Bruno Silva, running through Brandon Royval. And then he finally makes it to Alexander Pantoja, gets that well-deserved title shot. And we have the most unfortunate injury stoppage possible where Alexander Pantoja goes to post on his elbow from the takedown, dislocates his elbow horrifically, and the fight is over. So Joshua Van, in his biggest moment, fighting for the belt, where we want to see, can this kid step up to the plate? He winds up getting an injury TKO win to win the belt. And it was so unfortunate, and you don't want to discredit him, and you don't want to take anything away from him, but it's like, if you get injured in a fight like that, man, it's just the most unfortunate thing that can possibly happen. So he does win the belt from a technical injury, and he's the champ, and congratulations to him, but we still want to see him fight Alexander Pantoja in a real fight. Get in there, see if he can really outwork the champ, so they will rematch one day. But then you look over at the Tatsuro Taira side, man, and this kid has looked absolutely awesome since he's come into the UFC. He did have the the hiccup win against Brandon Royval, but outside of that, running through Hunsung Park, and then his most impressive win, no question, absolutely just steamrolling and running through Brandon Moreno, knocking him out, finishing him, a former champ, a huge feather in Tatsuro Taira's cap, so his grappling has looked absolutely phenomenal. His control, his back takes, his jiu-jitsu, it has looked like an absolute problem. I mean, very, very solid skills coming from Tatsuro Taira, and that's a very interesting test for Joshua Van because, we've seen Joshua Van get taken down before, but Joshua Van has been able to survive and get back up and work back up to his feet. But Tatsuro Taira has such a devastating body lock. He winds up getting, that triangle body lock. He's able to hold you, work your back, control you, look for the choke, so it's a very dangerous fight for Joshua Van. And if it hits the floor, and if Tatsuro Taira was able to hold him on the ground for an extended period of time, he could wind up finding that neck, getting underneath the chin, and choking Joshua Van out. So in order for Tatsuro Taira to win this fight, he is going to have to get Joshua Van down because on the feet, he is going to be completely outgunned. Tatsuro Taira is going to be the bigger fighter with the 5-inch reach, and he's got pretty sharp striking to set up his takedowns, but you cannot stand on the feet for an extended period of time with Joshua Van. And what I think is going to happen in this fight is that Tatsuro Taira is probably going to win the first round. He's going to be able to get in on Joshua Van early, grab a body lock, trip him, get him down. Probably gets on top, probably gets to his back. But I think Joshua Van is going to survive the back take. He's going to be able to survive the body triangle, survive that first round, and then once it gets into the second round, Tatsuro might be able to get him down one more time. But I think Joshua Van is going to be able to survive it. Him being the shorter fighter, more muscle, a little bit more explosive energy, I think Joshua Van's going to be able to get up from the takedown, and then he's going to start to kind of wear on Taira. And then Taira's, going to be trying to struggle to get him back down, fighting him in the clinch, trying to press in on him and get a hold of him again, and he's just going to start to zap that gas tank. And Joshua Van's going to start coming forward, putting combinations, putting pressure, putting boxing, putting all kinds of the proper shots on Tatsuro Taira, and I think he's just going to be able to sap him over the course of 5 rounds. And as it goes, Tatsuro will get more tired. The takedowns will fail more and more. He won't be able to push Joshua Van up against the cage, and that energy is just going to deplete. And Joshua Van has a fantastic gas tank, amazing cardio, and his striking, his boxing gets better as the fight goes. So I think Joshua Van is going to survive the early grappling from Tatsuro Taira in the first round and a half, maybe the first 2 rounds. And then once Taira cannot submit him and cannot finish him on the ground and can't control him in those later rounds, that's when Joshua Van's going to turn up the cardio, turn up the pressure, turn up the heat, and he's really going to start to put it on Tatsuro Taira, and he's going to experience striking and technique and boxing that he's never felt. So I think Joshua Van survives the early grappling storm, and I think he picks up a 48-47, maybe a 49-46 over Tatsuro Taira, shows he's the better boxer, the better striker, survives the grappling, and then he will probably go on to defend against Alexander Pantoja in the much-deserved and much-anticipated rematch. So Joshua Van, by decision, is the official pick. All right, and now we are looking at the main event of the evening for the vacant light heavyweight championship. We're looking at Jiří Procházka versus Carlos Ulberg, and a very, very fun fight, super interesting fight, and you look over at the Carlos Ulberg side, and man, Carlos has been an absolute problem, just steadily rising through the ranks and beating everybody. I mean, one of the most technically sharp and sound strikers we've ever seen in the light heavyweight division, and he's just gotten better and better in all that training with elite level fighters over at City Kickboxing like Israel Adesanya, Dan Hooker, Kai Kara-France, and Ulberg has just been able to put it together, that sharp technique, that tactical approach and how he strikes and how he downloads guys and how he's able to stay so defensively sound and pick the right shots and not waste energy when he's doing it. So Carlos Ulberg has just been improving so dramatically. And he had the rushing knockout against Alonzo Menifield. getting through Volkan Oezdemir, beating Jan Blachowicz, and then in his most recent win, knocking out Dominic Reyes. So Ulberg has just been a tactical assassin, very sharp, very precise, very calculated in how he strikes, doesn't waste a lot of energy, and makes a lot of the right decisions. But then you look over at the Jiří Procházka side, and Jiří Procházka is one of the most exciting, dynamic, deadly Category 5 storms we have ever seen. Jiří is an absolute machine and an unpredictable machine. You just never know what Jiří Procházka is going to do. You never know what's coming because he's just constantly moving, constantly switching stances, constantly giving you feints and reads and things to make you bite and go. He's trying to overload your brain. And we've seen the only person that has been able to shut Jiří Procházka down is Alex Pereira, and that says so much. The most deadly striker in the UFC, the most deadly kickboxer in the UFC, has been the only person to be able to solve the puzzle of Jiří Procházka, and that's simply because of pure power, pure technique, and pure just reflex, being able to catch an unpredictable storm coming at you, which is very hard to do. But outside of that, Jiří Procházka has run through everybody. Alexander Rakic eating a ton of leg kicks in the beginning of that fight, walking through the leg kicks. They didn't affect him at all. If you listen to the commentary, classic Joe Rogan, oh, that calf is done, that foot is done, that ankle's done. No, it wasn't. His foot was fine. Never walked on it tenderly, was never limping on it, never switched stance, maybe just for a second, but then went right back to that leg, putting full pressure on it. And, you can't even the leg kicks that Alex Pereira were hitting Jiří with were not affecting him that badly. Like, he would switch stance off of one of them, but he was still coming forward, still moving. So he's just made out of iron. It's insane. You've never seen him limp on a leg or go to take a step and be like, oh, that leg is toast. He eats leg kicks like crazy. He takes damage like crazy. He eats punches like they're nothing. It's crazy how almost indestructible Jiří has been outside of Pereira's power. So, Jiří is just such a handful to deal with. And you look at the Carlos Ulberg side, man, and he's technical, he's sharp, he's methodical, and that is going to get you the win against so many other guys. When you're that top level and you really take your time to block and defend and roll with shots and really pick your range and pay attention to what you're throwing and conserving energy, it's going to work for a lot of guys. But the problem with this fight is that Carlos Ulberg has never fought a dynamic, indestructible storm like this. He's never fought somebody who is so wild that's coming at him, throwing everything at you from all different angles, from all different positions. And we saw it in the Khalil Roundtree fight with Jiří Procházka, where Khalil was winning the early half of that fight. Jiří looked flat. He looked kind of uncertain. Something seemed off. And you're like, what's going on with him? He doesn't seem the same. And it wasn't that Khalil was like just, overwhelming him and making Jiří go, I can't figure him out. Jiří just seemed kind of stuck in one gear for a little bit. But then when Jiří went, guess what? It's time to go into second gear. Now it's time to go into third gear. He started to hunt Khalil. He started to break him down. He started to move and become Jiří, and that fire ignited. And you're like, oh boy, the tide is about to shift. The tables are about to turn, and now he's going to break Khalil. And that's exactly what he did. Khalil was the better technical striker, the more powerful striker, but Jiří Procházka said, guess what? I'm going to turn it up now, and you're not going to be able to deal with it. And he absolutely butchered Khalil. And that is what I think is going to happen in this fight. I think Carlos Ulberg is going to be the better technical striker early. He's going to be calmer. He's going to be popping jabs, popping 1-2s, and he's going to be downloading Jiří. And Yuri's going to be kind of, flowing with it, kind of bobbing with the waves, like, okay. Carlos might take that first round off better technical striking and technique. And then as it gets into the second round, Yuri's going to start to kind of crank it up a little more. And as Jiří comes forward, I think Carlos is going to start to go, oh shit, like, this is kind of hard to read. I can't really get my timing anymore. I can't find my technical shots. Yuri's cutting angles, dipping his head, coming up with uppercuts, spinning attacks, spinning elbows. And I think it's going to be a problem. And I think, again, Carlos is going to look good early. calm, tactical, put together, the better, cleaner striker with the better fundamentals, but then Jiří is just going to throw all that in the trash and go, guess what? Your technique, your fundamentals, your precision, your weighting and downloading is not going to matter because now I'm going to hit you like a tsunami. I'm going to throw everything that a hurricane can throw at you, and I'm going to break you. And I think as the fight goes, he is going to find the shots on Ulberg, overwhelm Ulberg, get past his defense, get past that technique, and I think Jiří is going to unload a storm on him in the third round, and I think he's going to be able to finish Carlos because Carlos has just not fought an absolute Tasmanian devil like this before, and it's so hard to deal with. It's so hard to contain, and most people can't do it. Now, Carlos could, maybe he does stay super technical, super sharp. He's able to catch Jiří coming in. He's able to beat him to the punch in every crazy area he goes, and he's able to upset Jiří with better, cleaner technique. But I think Jiří's just going to be too much like he is for everybody, and he's going to survive the kicks and the combinations. He's going to keep breaking you and overwhelming you, and I think Carlos is going to be in trouble in the middle of this fight, and I think Jiří is going to wind up finishing him and reclaim that light heavyweight title.